Hey guys, it's IDW, and today we are going to be talking about something very different that I don't really usually talk about, and that would be Monopoly, more specifically Monopoly strategies. Now I know that a lot of you are already probably thinking, hey, isn't Monopoly just luck? Isn't there no strategy to it? Isn't it just something that you play with kids in order to teach them math? And all that is true, but nevertheless, there are actually some strategies that go along with Monopoly that I really feel that not a lot of people these days actually know about. And I think that these strategies a lot more people should know because it's really simple and really fun math, and it's just a good way to have a good time. So yeah. Anyways, without any further ado, we can actually talk about the ridiculous amount of math that there is in Monopoly, because there is an absurd amount of math that you could do with Monopoly, because it's just a statistics playground, and yeah, there's all sorts of ridiculous things. But we're going to try to keep the amount of math that we're going to be doing restricted to just the stuff that is going to be competitively valuable. So what exactly is the best way to win, you might wonder? And the answer is, well, you would have the best Monopoly, of course. So, how do we determine if Monopoly is good or not? Well, that would be determined by its ability to make players run out of money. In other words, how fast we have to make it so that the Monopoly is going to give us more money than our opponents are getting every time that they regain that money. So what's the most basic form of money that you regain that is completely reliable? And that would be the amount of money that you get every time you go around the board, which is $200. So if a Monopoly gives us more than $200 every time an opponent goes around the board, then we can say that it pretty much is worth winning the game. So you might be wondering, how exactly do we calculate something like this? And the answer turns out to be really simple. All you have to do is you just need to multiply the amount of money that you make from a property by the odds of landing on that property per trip around the board. And the reason that we're doing trip around the board rather than like dice rolls is that if you compare trip around the board to the $200 that you get by default, then you can really easily see that you're making more money from the Monopoly than your opponents are making from going around the board. So yeah, let's just take the rent values for hotels and let's multiply them by the frequency. So you might be wondering, how do you get the frequency? And the answer is that we use something called a Monte Carlo simulation, and that's basically where you just like program the rules of moving in Monopoly, and then you just like have it go 1,000,000 times around the board, or maybe even, I forget how many I did in my Monte Carlo simulation, but it was at least 1,000,000,000, I think. And then you just see how many times each property is landed on. So yeah, this Monte Carlo simulation allows us to figure out the odds of landing on each property. And once again, this is valuable because we want to figure out if we're making more money from the Monopoly than we are every time we go around the board. So, the resulting numbers you can see on the screen now. We've got the utilities at number 10, $23 every trip around the board. Then the dark purples, $89 every trip around the board. Then the railroads, $135 every trip around the board. The light blues, $132 every trip around the board. The light purples, $348 every trip around the board. You can see that we're starting to accelerate up here. Orange is $510 every time we go around the board, pretty darn solid, up $200 from last time. Dark blues, which are $513 every time we go around the board, about the same as the oranges. The reds, $547, and the yellows, $550, about the same again. And the best Monopoly in the game, according to this, is the greens, at about $600 every trip around the board. And this is probably not surprising to people, but this model that we have right here actually isn't that good. And the easiest way to see this is, let's just actually put this into practice. Let's say that you and your opponent have all the properties in the yellow and light blue Monopolies, and you're going to make a trade. And both of you can reasonably spend about $600 on the Monopolies, and you'll have enough money to like survive and pay rents. But you end up taking the yellows, of course, because they're higher on the rankings. In the end, you lose the game. No other trades are made, even though that really wouldn't happen. So you might be wondering, what the heck? How did the light blues, which, if we look back here, are rank 7, beat the greens, which are the second best monopoly in the game? So let's just do a quick little calculation here. If we invest the $600 in the light blues, then we make $171 every trip around the board, but the yellows make 90. And the reason for this is that the scale that we were using earlier is comparing monopolies where we invest fully into hotels. And that varies from monopoly to monopoly. For instance, if you compare the greens to the utilities, the greens cost $3,000, twice your starting money, in order to get them fully invested. On the other hand, the worst, the utilities, only cost $300. That means that the greens are 10 times as expensive as the utilities. And if you divide the greens value by 10, it shows that they're only twice as good as the utilities. So, yeah, not 20. So you might be wondering, what on earth is the best way to tell this stuff now? And the answer is that you'll use a graph like this. Now, when you look at a graph like this, you might be wondering, what on earth is going on? So, first of all, let's talk about what this graph is. On one axis, the y-axis, you can see the amount of money that is being made every trip around the board. On the x-axis, you can see the amount of money that you invest in the monopoly. Now you'll notice that some monopolies, like the dark blues and greens, by the way the color corresponds directly, they don't actually increase every single increment along the bottom, while the light blues do increase every increment, and that's just because every time the line is increasing is representing a new house, and with more expensive house, the leaps are more infrequent, but they're more substantial because you get more from them. With cheaper houses, on the other hand, like the light blues, the leaps are really frequent, but they aren't quite as substantial. Now, you'll also notice that every monopoly flattens out in the end, and the reason that this is significant is that there's a certain point after which the monopoly levels off, and because of this, if you want to invest more in it, you can't put any more into it, so that value is just going to go straight along the top. And it makes it look a little ugly, but unfortunately that's the way that we're going to have to go. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can look at the graph, and you can see immediately that the light blues are probably the best investment in the game, while you can still invest in them. And you can see that they're a huge outlier until you've fully invested in them. They're like $50 more than every other monopoly. They're just insane. And the problem is that once you have them fully invested, they don't actually break the limit that you need to break in order to break that $200 per trip around the board. And you actually do, but the thing is that it's not enough to win with, because you need a certain buffer above that in order to win. So we're going to say that the light blues are going to fall under one category of monopolies. And these monopolies are going to be monopolies that are cheaper, but are really, really good places to invest your money. On the other hand, we're going to say that monopolies like the greens and the reds are late-game monopolies, and they're really expensive, but they're enough to knock your opponents out of the game. And ideally, you would use a combination of two of these, make a lot of money off of one monopoly, and then invest all of it in another monopoly that can take your opponents out, and that's probably the most effective way to win the game. And a classic example of this is the reds and light blues, which is probably the most powerful two-monopoly combination in the game. Because, as you can see, you don't need to invest much in the light blues for them to become the best investment of money in the game. So once you've got them fully developed, you could move on to the reds. And the reds are extremely frequent, and they also give you a lot of money. So that makes it so that it's really easy to bankrupt a player with the reds. But you need to get all the money to invest in the reds from the light blues. But the light blues are such a good investment that you'll probably be able to get them and running in no time. And this is what makes the reds and light blues so dangerous in the late game. So, with that out of the way, we're just going to say that the best early game monopolies are the light blues, the light purples, and maybe railroads and utilities, but they're not. The railroads and utilities are often really overrated. They're really bad, so only if you have no other alternative and you're trying to get something that doesn't take much to invest in, which there really isn't anything. So the best late game monopolies are the reds, the yellows, and the greens. Now the reds and the yellows are usually the two you want to go for. The thing about the greens is they're pretty much a money trash can. They're like the worst investment rate in the game, so you only want to invest in them if you have nowhere else to put your money, and you have a lot of it. Remember, it takes 3,000, twice the amount of money you're given to start with to fully invest in these. After that, there are two monopolies that I like to say are a jack of all trades, in that they can sort of bankrupt an opposing player, but at the same time, they are also a pretty darn good investment, and those would be the oranges and the dark blues. And they're sort of really on this line between the two, and they can really take the place of either one. Like, if you get the oranges and the light blues, that's like the only case I would say you should ever get the greens, but also you should note that the oranges are a better investment than the light purples, not as good as the light blues, and that the dark purples are not as good as the light purples, but they're better than the railroads and utilities. And also you should know that the dark blues are like better than the greens, but not as good as the yellows, and the oranges are worse than the greens in terms of their ability to bankrupt people. So yeah. Anyways, without any further ado, that's just about everything that we really need to cover today if we're talking about Monopoly. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed. I hope you guys will be able to put this stuff into practice, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time.